Every time you buy gas, pay your mortgage, or watch prices climb at the grocery store, you're feeling the ripple effects of a system most people don't even know exists. A system where one country's currency controls the entire planet. That currency is the US dollar. And right now, in 2026, that control is being challenged like never before. But here's what's wild. The dollar doesn't just affect Americans. It controls interest rates in Brazil. It decides whether factories stay open in Vietnam. It determines if governments in Africa can afford to import food. One currency, printing by one central bank, calling the shots for 8 billion people. So how did this happen? And more importantly, what happens when it starts to unravel? Let's go back to 1944. World War II is ending. Europe is destroyed. Japan is in ruins. But America is untouched. Its factories are booming. Its military is the strongest on Earth. And it holds most of the world's gold. At a meeting in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, world leaders make a deal. The US dollar will be backed by gold. Every other currency will be pegged to the dollar. Basically, America becomes the banker of the world. And for nearly 30 years, it works. But then, in 1971, President Nixon does something shocking. He ends the gold standard. The dollar is no longer backed by anything physical. It's just paper, faith, a promise. You'd think this would kill the dollar's dominance, but instead, something genius happens. In 1974, the US makes a secret deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia will only sell oil in US dollars. In return, America will protect them militarily and buy their debt. Suddenly, if any country wants oil, the lifeblood of the modern economy, they need dollars. This is the birth of the petrodollar system, and it changes everything. Countries start hoarding dollars. They keep them in reserves. They buy US Treasury bonds. This creates constant demand for dollars, which lets America borrow cheaply. It's like having a credit card with no limit that the whole world is forced to accept. But the real power isn't just oil. It's the entire financial plumbing of the planet. About 88% of all global currency trades involve the dollar. It's used in 58% of international payments. When a business in Germany buys semiconductors from South Korea, they settle in dollars. When a bank in Singapore lends money to a company in Mexico, it's denominated in dollars. Why? Because the dollar is liquid, stable, backed by the largest economy and strongest military on Earth. It's not necessarily because the dollar is the best. It's because everyone else uses it, so you have to use it too. It's a network effect, like Facebook or Amazon. The more people are on it, the harder it is to leave. And then there's SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. It's the messaging system banks use to send money across borders. And guess what? It's dominated by dollars and controlled largely by the US and its allies. If you get kicked off SWIFT, you're basically cut off from the global economy. Russia found this out the hard way after invading Ukraine. Iran has been dealing with it for years. This gives America an unbelievable weapon: financial sanctions. The US can freeze assets, block transactions, and cripple entire economies without firing a single shot. It's economic warfare, and the dollar is the missile. Think about it. America can print money, and the whole world absorbs the inflation. When the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates, it sends shockwaves through emerging markets. When it raises them, it pulls capital back to the US, crashing currencies in Turkey, Argentina, and Pakistan. Countries have to play by America's rules, even if it wrecks their own economies. This is what economists call exorbitant privilege. America gets to run massive trade deficits. It can borrow trillions at low interest rates. It can spend $800 billion a year on defense. And the rest of the world pays for it by holding dollars and buying treasury bonds. But here's the thing. Empires don't last forever, and cracks are forming. China has been making moves for years. It launched the Petrodollar, settling oil trades in its own currency. In 2025, it expanded currency swap agreements with dozens of countries. Russia and China are trading in rubles and yuan. India is buying Russian oil in rupees. Even Saudi Arabia, America's oldest partner in the petrodollar system, is now open to selling oil in other currencies. Then there's BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Together, they represent nearly half the world's population and a massive chunk of global GDP, and they're building alternatives. BRICS nations are now conducting 90% of bilateral trade in local currencies. They're developing payment systems that bypass SWIFT. They're talking about a shared digital currency. Now, let's be clear. A BRICS currency isn't happening tomorrow. There are too many conflicts, too much distrust between members. China and India don't exactly see eye to eye. But that's not the point. The point is they don't need a single currency to hurt the dollar. They just need alternatives. And those alternatives are multiplying. Foreign central banks are now holding more gold than U.S. Treasury securities. Why? Because gold doesn't come with sanctions risk. It doesn't lose value when the U.S. imposes tariffs or freezes assets. It's neutral. And then there's the weaponization problem. Every time the U.S. uses the dollar as a weapon, freezing Russian reserves, sanctioning Chinese banks, blocking Iranian transactions, it gives the rest of the world a reason to build an escape hatch. Even U.S. allies are nervous. Europe has talked about creating more financial independence. France's former finance minister openly called for reducing reliance on the dollar. Because when America sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. And when America weaponizes finance, everyone else feels vulnerable. But if the dollar loses its dominance, what happens? First, borrowing costs in the U.S. will rise. Right now, the world is willing to lend to America at cheap rates because they need dollars. If that demand drops, interest rates go up. That means higher mortgage payments, more expensive car loans, and bigger credit card bills. Second, inflation. When other countries stop buying as many treasury bonds, the Federal Reserve might have to print more money to cover deficits. More money chasing the same goods means prices go up. Third, the U.S. government loses flexibility. Right now, America can run trillion-dollar deficits without immediate consequences because the world keeps buying its debt. If that stops, Washington will face hard choices. Cut spending? Raise taxes? Either way, it's painful. Fourth, geopolitical power shrinks. Financial leverage is power. Without the dollar's dominance, America can't sanction as effectively. It can't control the global economy the same way. That changes everything from trade negotiations to military alliances. Now, does this mean the dollar is going to collapse next month? No. It's still the most widely used currency. The U.S. economy is still the largest. The military is still unmatched. Financial markets are still the deepest and most liquid. But the trend is clear. The dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from over 70% in 2000 to 58% in 2025. That might not sound like much, but in the world of reserve currencies, it's a massive shift. For 50 years, dollar dominance has let America shape the world. It's funded wars, supported allies, punished enemies, and maintained a standard of living that wouldn't be possible otherwise. When that fades, the world changes. Maybe it becomes more multipolar. Maybe regional currencies take over. Maybe we see more fragmentation, more conflict, more instability. One thing is certain. We're living through a turning point. The system that's defined global finance since World War II is being challenged. And what comes next will affect your paycheck, your savings, your country, and your future. The dollar's dominance was never guaranteed. It was built on decisions, deals, and power, and it can be lost the same way.